but it is still a lot of money. We know that paid family leave is out, but universal pre-K for kids, that's in, as is $555 billion for climate change initiatives, important for the president as he heads off to the UN Climate Summit in Scotland. This is on top of the bipartisan infrastructure plan. All right, here now, the President of the United States.
Today, I'm pleased to announce that after months of tough and thoughtful negotiations, I know we have a historic economic framework. It's a framework that will create millions of jobs, grow the economy, invest in our nation and our people, turn the climate crisis into an opportunity and put us on a path not only to compete, but to win the economic competition for the 21st century against China and every other major country in the world. It's fiscally responsible. It's fully paid for. 17 Nobel Prize winners in economics have said it will lower the inflationary pressures on the economy. And over the next 10 years, it will not add to the deficit at all. It will actually reduce the deficit, according to economists. I want to thank my colleagues in the Congress for their leadership. We spent hours and hours and hours over months and months working on this. No one got everything they wanted, including me. But that's what compromise is. That's consensus. And that's what I ran on. I've long said compromise and consensus are the only way to get big things done in a democracy, important things done for the country. I know it's hard. I know how deeply people feel about the things that they fight for. But this framework includes historic investments in our nation and in our people. Any single element of this framework would fundamentally be viewed as a fundamental change in America. Taken together, they're truly consequential. I'll have more to say after I return from the critical meetings in Europe this week. But for now, let me lay out a few points. First, we face, and I apologize for saying this again, we face an inflection point as a nation. For most of the 20th century, we led the world by a significant margin because we invested in our people, not only in our roads and our highways and our bridges, but in our people and our families. We didn't just build an interstate highway system, we built a highway to the sky. We invested to win the space race, and we won. We're also among the first to provide access to free education for all Americans, beginning back in the late 1800s. That decision alone to invest in our children and their families was a major part of why we were able to lead the world for much of the 20th century. But somewhere along the way, we stopped investing in ourselves, investing in our people. America is still the largest economy in the world. We still have the most productive workers and most innovative minds in the world. But we've risked losing our edge as a nation. Our infrastructure used to be rated the best in the world. Today, according to the World Economic Forum, we rank 13th in the world. We used to lead the world in educational achievement. Now the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development ranks America 35th out of the 37 major countries when it comes to investing in early childhood education and care. And we know how our children start impacts significantly on how they'll finish. We can't be competitive in the 21st century global economy if we continue this slide. That's why I've said all along, we need to build America from the bottom up and the middle out, not from the top down, with the trickle-down economics that's always failed us. I can't think of a single time when the middle class has done well that the wealthy haven't done very well. I think of many times, including now, when the wealthy, the super wealthy, do very well, and the middle class don't do well. That's why I propose the investments Congress is now considering in two critical pieces of legislation. Positions I ran on as president, positions I announced when I laid out in a joint session of Congress what my economic agenda was. These are not about left versus right, or moderate versus progressive, or anything else that pits Americans against one another. This is about competitiveness versus complacency. Competitiveness versus complacency. It's about expanding opportunity, not opportunity denied. It's about leading the world or letting the world pass us by. Today, with my Democratic colleagues, we have a framework for my Build Back Better initiative. And here's how it will fundamentally change the lives of millions of people for the better. Millions of you are in the so-called sandwich generation who feel financially squeezed by raising a child and caring for an aging parent. About 820,000 seniors in America and people with disabilities have applied for Medicaid, and they're on a waiting list right now to get home care. They need some help. They don't have to be kicked out of their homes, but they need a little help getting around, having their meals made occasionally for them. They don't want to put them in nursing homes, not because of the cost, but because it's a matter of dignity. They want to stay in their homes. But it's hard. You're just looking for an answer so your parents can keep living independently with dignity. For millions of families in America, this issue is the most important issue they're facing. It's personal. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to expand services for seniors so families can get help from well-trained, well-paid professionals to help them take care of their parents at home, to cook meals for them, to get their groceries for them, to help them get around, to help them live in their own home with the dignity they deserve to be afforded. Quite frankly, what we found is that this is more popular or as popular as anything else we're proposing because the American people understand the need. It's a matter of dignity and pride for our parents. 30 years ago, we ranked number 7 among the advanced economies in the world as a share of women working. You know where we are today? We ranked 23rd. 23rd, 7 to 23. Once again, our competitors are investing, and we're standing still. Today, there are nearly 2 million women in America not working today simply because they can't afford child care. Typical family spends about $11,000 a year on child care. Some states, it's $14,500 a year per child. We're going to make sure nearly all families earning less than $300,000 a year will pay no more than 7% of their income for child care. And for a family making $100,000 a year, that will save them more than $5,000 in child care. This is a fundamental game changer for families and for our economy, as more parents, especially women, can get back to work and work in the workforce. I'm looking at a lot of significant press people in front of me. A lot of them are working mothers. They know what it costs. I remember when I got to the Senate, I lost my wife and daughter in an accident, my 2 boys. I started commuting 250 miles a day because I had my mom and my dad and my brother and my sister to help me take care of my kids because I couldn't afford child care, and I was getting a serious salary, $42,000 a year. We've also extended the historic middle-class tax cut. That's what I call it, middle-class tax cut for parents. That is the expanded child tax credit we passed through the American Rescue Plan. What that means is, for folks at home, they're getting $300 a month for every child under the age of 6, $250 for every child under the age of 18. We're extending that for another year. The money is already a life changer for so many working families. This will help cut child poverty in half this year, according to the experts. But that's not all it does. It changes the whole dynamic for working parents. In the past, if you paid taxes and had a good income, you could deduct under the tax code $2,000 per child from the taxes you owed. But how many families do you know, a cashier, waiters, healthcare workers, who never got the benefit of the full tax credit because they didn't have that much to deduct, and it wasn't refundable? So it either came off your tax bill or you didn't get full credit. Why should if somebody making $500,000 a year, or $150,000 or $200,000 a year get to write it off their taxes? And the people who need the help even more, they don't have that much tax to pay. They don't get the benefit, and they have the same cost of raising their children. 80% of those left out were working parents who just didn't make enough money. That's why in the American Rescue Plan, we didn't just expand the amount of the middle-class tax cut. We also made it refundable. This framework will make it permanently refundable, making sure that the families who need it get a full credit for it, in addition to those who are already getting full credit. They're going to make sure that every 3- and 4-year-old child in America will go to high-quality preschool. That's part of the legislation I just brought up to the Congress. Studies show that when we put 3 and 4 years old in school, not daycare, school, we increase by up to 47% the chance that that child, no matter what their background, will be able to earn a college degree. As my wife Jill is in the back here, we always says, any country that out-educates us is going to outcompete us. We can finally take us from 12 years to 14 years of universal education in America. We also make investments in higher education by increasing Pell Grants to help students from lower-income families attend community colleges and 4-year schools. And we invest in historically black universities, colleges and universities, HBCUs, minority-serving institutions, and tribal colleges to make sure every young student has a shot at a good-paying job in the future. This framework extends tax credits to lower premiums for folks who are in the Affordable Care Act for another 3 years. For 4 million folks in the 12 states that haven't expanded Medicaid, all the rest have, this framework will enable you to get affordable coverage. And Medicare will now cover the cost of hearing aids and hearing checkups. This framework also makes the most significant investment to deal with the climate crisis ever happened, beyond any other advanced nation in the world. Over 1 billion metric tons of emission reductions, at least 10 times bigger on climate than any bill that has ever passed before, and enough to position us for a 50 to 52% emission reductions by the year 2030. And we'll do it in ways that grow the domestic industries, create good-paying union jobs, address long-standing environmental injustices as well. Tax credit to help people do things like weatherize their homes so they use less energy, install solar panels and develop clean energy products, and help business produce more clean energy. And when paired with the bipartisan infrastructure bill, we will truly transform this nation. Historic investments in passenger rail. I know everybody says, oh, Biden's a rail guy. That's true. But passenger rail and freight rail and public transit, it's going to make take hundreds of thousands of vehicles off the road, saving millions of barrels of oil. Everybody knows, all the studies show, if you can get from point A to point B on electric rail, you won't drive your car. You'll take the rail service. We also learned that in most major cities in America, minority populations, the jobs they used to have in town, they're now out of town. Roughly 60% of the folks, they don't have vehicles, so they need to have a means to get out of town, to their jobs, to be on time. This will do that, like it did for Detroit. 95% of the 840,000 school buses in America run on diesel. Every day, more than 25 million children and thousands of bus drivers breathe polluted air on the way to and from school from the diesel exhaust. We're going to replace thousands of these with electric school buses that have big batteries underneath and that are good for the climate. I went down to one of the manufacturing facilities, saw them, got in one, drive them. They do not expend any. They do not expend any pollution into the air. We'll build out the first ever national network of 500,000 electric vehicle charging stations all across the country. So when you buy an electric vehicle, and you get credit for buying it, you buy an electric vehicle, you can go all the way across America on a single tank of gas, figuratively speaking. It's not gas. You plug it in. 500,000 of them, these stations along the way. We're going to get off the sidelines on manufacturing solar panels and wind farms and electric vehicles with targeted manufacturing credits. You manufacture, you get them a credit for doing it. These will help grow the supply chains in communities too often left behind. And we're going to reward countries for paying good wages, for companies, I should say, for good wages and for sourcing their materials from here in the United States. That means tens of millions of panels and turbines, doubling the number of electric vehicles we have on the road within just 3 years. We'll be able to sell and export these products and technologies to the rest of the world and creating thousands more jobs because we are once again going to be the innovators. We'll also make historic investments in environmental cleanup and remediation. That means putting people to work in good-paying jobs at prevailing wage, capping hundreds of thousands of abandoned wells and gas wells, oil and gas wells, that need to be capped because they are leaking things that hurt the air. Putting a stop to the methane leaks in the pipelines, protecting the health of our communities. It's a big deal. And we'll build up our resilience for the next superstorms, drought, wildfires, and hurricanes that represent a blinking code red for America and the world. Last year alone, these types of extreme weather events you've all been covering and you've all witnessed and some of you have been caught in the middle of have caused $99 billion in damage to the United States within the last year. $99 billion. We're not spending any money to deal with this? It's costing us significantly. In Pittsburgh, I met an IBW electrical worker who climbs up on those power lines in the middle of a storm to try to put transformers in to keep the lights on when storms hit. He calls himself a 100% union guy. His job's dangerous. As he said, I quote, "I don't want my kids growing up in a world where the threat of climate change hangs over their heads," end of quote. Folks, we all have that obligation to our children and to our grandchildren. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is also the most significant investment since we built the interstate highway system and won the space race decades ago. This is about rebuilding the arteries of our economy. Across the country now, there are 45,000 bridges and 173,000 miles of roads that are in poor condition. Some of the bridges you don't even take a chance of going across. They're shut down. They can't be built back to the same standard because the weather's not going to get a lot better. We just got to keep from getting a heck of a lot worse. We have to build back better and stronger. No one should have to hold their breath as they cross a rundown bridge or a dangerous intersection in their hometown. We're going to put hardworking Americans on the job to bring our infrastructure up to speed. Good union jobs at prevailing wages. Jobs you can raise a family on. My dad would say you could have a little breathing room. Jobs that can't be outsourced. Jobs replacing lead water pipes so families can drink clean water, improving the health of our children and putting plumbers and pipe fitters to work. Jobs laying thousands of miles of transmission lines to build a modern energy grid. Jobs making a high-speed internet affordable and available everywhere in rural and urban America, particularly including the 35% of rural America that goes without it right now. This pandemic has made clear the need for affordable and available high-speed internet. The idea of a parent having to put their kids in the car for virtual learning, drive and sit in a McDonald's parking lot so the child can access the internet when school is taught virtually is not only unnecessary, it's just wrong. It's wrong. As I said before, these plans are fiscally responsible. They are fully paid for. They don't add a single penny to the deficit. They don't raise taxes on anyone making less than $400,000 a year. In fact, they reduce the deficit. Here's how. I don't want to punish anyone's success. I'm a capitalist. I want everyone to be able to, if they want to be a millionaire or billionaire, to be able to seek their goal. But all I'm asking is pay your fair share. Pay your fair share. Pay your fair share. And right now, many of them are paying virtually nothing. Last year, the 55 most profitable corporations in America, 55 of them, paid zero in federal income tax on about $40 billion in profit. If they report big profits to their shareholders, they should be paying taxes. It's that simple. That's why the Build Back Better framework will have a 15% minimum on the largest corporations, a minimum tax of 15%. The top 1% of the wealthiest Americans evade, it's estimated by the experts, $160 billion a year in federal taxes. That's wrong. We're going to change that. I want to emphasize what I said from the beginning. Under my plans, if you earn less than $400,000, you won't pay a single penny more in federal taxes, period. In fact, these bills continue cutting taxes for middle class, for child care, for health care, so much more. Let me close with this. For much too long, working people of this nation and the middle class of this country have been dealt out of the American deal. It's time to deal them back in. I ran for president saying it was time to reduce the burden on the middle class, to rebuild the backbone of this nation, working people and the middle class. I couldn't have been any clearer from the very moment I announced my candidacy. That's why I wrote these bills in the first place and took them to the people. I campaigned on them, and the American people spoke. This agenda, the agenda that's in these bills, is what 81 million Americans voted for. More people voted than any time in American history. That's what they voted for. Their voices deserve to be heard, not denied, or worse, ignored. Because here's what I know. If we make these investments, there will be no stopping the American people or America. We will own the future. I've long said it's never been a good bet to bet against the American people. I've said that to foreign leaders as well as everyone here in this country, which means it's always a good bet to bet on the American people. Just give them half a chance. And that's what we're doing. That's what these plans do. They're about betting on America, about believing in America, about believing in the capacity of the American people. If you look at the history of the journey of this nation, what becomes crystal clear is this. I'll say it again. Given half a chance, the American people have never, ever, ever, ever let the country down. So let's get this done. God bless you all, and may God protect your troops, and I'll see you in Italy and in Scotland. Thank you.
And there, the President of the United States coming before cameras to announce what he called a historic framework for his Build Back Better plan, a plan that is worth about $1.75 trillion that would include money for a child care benefit. It would expand services for seniors, what he called the middle class tax credit, which is really a child tax credit. And he said climate funding, which is estimated to be some $550 billion, 10 times anything Congress has passed that's ever done on climate change. Let's bring in our CBS News chief Washington correspondent, Major Garrett, who is at the White House. And Major, we've been covering a lot of the Democratic chaos and wrangling over this bill. But if there's a framework on this, this would no doubt be a very historic moment. It's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, and it is the culmination, Nora, as you just said, of all sorts of weeks of internal disagreements, some might say disarray among Democrats, House and Senate. Now the president's saying it's time to deliver. And how did he put that in the most personal and political terms possible? Earlier this morning, he met behind closed doors with House Democrats, and he said essentially, Nora, the fate of the domestic agenda of the entire Biden presidency will be decided in the next couple of days by what House and Senate Democrats do. The president looked at those House Democrats, some of whom still have not publicly signed on to this, and said, I need your help. I need your votes. Now, what's important, Nora, right now is no one in the Democratic constituency in the House or the Senate have said, no, I'm going to vote against this. They want to say, They're saying, I want to see the full legislative text. That's an important next step in this. Framework is general. Text is specific. But because those House and Senate Democrats are not no yet, the White House believes ultimately when they see that legislative language, they will all come around, and within the next few days, these two pillars of the Biden domestic agenda, infrastructure, Build Back Better, will get across the finish line.
I'm so glad you brought that up, those two pillars of this, because it's more than just one big bill. And let's bring in Nicole Killian, our congressional correspondent, to talk about that. Nicole, as you know so well, because you walk the halls of Congress every day and talk to these members, it's not only that $1.75 trillion that the president talked about there, this human infrastructure, but also the more than $1 trillion, this bipartisan deal on the roads and the bridges and the new electric buses, as the president talked about there. I mean, this is, in addition to the $1.9 trillion that he had for the American Rescue Plan in March, we're talking about nearly $4 trillion that the president can say, we achieved this, the Democratic Party achieved that this year.
Absolutely. And you heard the president underscore what historic investments he believes will be made in the country by passing both this social spending package as well as the infrastructure plan. The question is timing and how quickly this will move forward. To Major's point, there are many lawmakers who still want to see the details. And we know actually some House members, members of the Progressive Caucus, are meeting now. Their votes are going to be critical in all of this, particularly to that smaller infrastructure package, because it was progressives that called for a delay in that bill last month. And there are questions about whether that vote will in fact happen this week. Speaker Pelosi has not given any indications as of yet if that will be the case. But again, lawmakers deliberating as we speak now.
So just to clarify, Nicole, are you expecting a vote later today, though, on the bipartisan infrastructure bill?
I think that's unclear. You know, when I asked Congressional Progressive Caucus Chair Pramila Jayapal if her caucus will support the infrastructure bill now, because up until now, dozens of her members have said they will vote against it until they see the finer details of that larger social spending package. She said she will have to take it back to her caucus and see. And as I mentioned, they are meeting right now. Democratic leaders have made clear they want to move forward with this. They want to try to get those tangible impacts when it comes to fixing America's roads, bridges, rail. They want that to trickle out to the American people as quickly as possible. So from that standpoint, Democratic leaders are still hopeful they can have a vote at some point before the end of this month.
Nicole Killian, thank you. Major Garrett at the White House, thank you. And as Nicole has reported on what happened inside that meeting that the president had with congressional Democrats earlier today, he said to them, I need a vote, because he said the House and the Senate majorities and my presidency will be determined by what happens in the next week. Our coverage continues on our 24-hour streaming service, CBSN. You can watch it at cbsnews.com or download our CBS News app on your cell phone, or if you got a connected TV. There'll be more on your local news and tonight on the CBS Evening News. This has been a CBS News special report. I'm Nora O'Donnell in Washington.
For news 24 hours a day, go to cbsnews.com.
All right, Anne-Marie, the President of the United States, finally delivering those remarks that we were all anticipating this morning. We will continue our discussion with Major Garrett and Nicole Killian in just a moment. But President really hitting and firing on all cylinders when it came to describing the framework for this proposal that he has before the Congress. At one point, speaking about probably one of the biggest issues that has been the sticking point for Joe Manchin of West Virginia and Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, the president saying that he wants everybody to be able to pay, or he wants everybody to pay their fair share when it comes to taxes. The president saying this, if you want to be a millionaire or a billionaire, to be able to seek their goal, but I'm asking to pay your fair share, pay your fair share. And right now, many of them are paying virtually nothing. So President striking the right tone, which is one of optimism, but there are still, as you heard Nicole Killian suggesting to Nora O'Donnell, that there are some sticking points. I just want to play, before we bring in Major and Nicole, what Senator Bernie Sanders had to say just moments ago.
If you look at the bill that the president announced today, it is probably the most consequential bill since the 1960s in terms of protecting the needs of working families, of children, the elderly, the sick, and the poor. It is a major, major step forward. But clearly, to my mind, it has some major gaps in it. The American people are very, very clear that they are sick and tired of paying the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. There is, to the best of my knowledge, no language in there that takes on the pharmaceutical industry, demands Medicare, negotiating prices, and lowers the cost of prescription drugs in America. And that's a major problem in the bill. The members of the House, in my view, are going to have an assurance. What we have said is, all of you know, from day one, that both of these bills are linked. I support the infrastructure bill, but I want to see a strong Build Back Better bill as well, and they're linked together. So what you don't want to see is the infrastructure bill passed and then not have the kind of Build Back Better bill that we need, and that's why you need 50 members on board before there should be a vote, in my view.
All right. CBS News Chief Washington correspondent Major Garrett joins us now, as does CBS News congressional correspondent Nicole Killian, who's on Capitol Hill. So, Major Nicole, I mean, we just played that soundbite from Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders always passionate about the policies that he cares about, but I want to read to you both a statement from Kyrsten Sinema that I saw on Twitter earlier. After months of productive, good faith negotiations with the President of the United States and the White House, we've made significant progress on the proposed budget reconciliation package. I look forward to getting this done, expanding economic opportunities, and helping everyday families get ahead. And while Senator Sanders' remarks are noteworthy, I got to think that this is a big deal too, Major.
So what you need to listen for right now, America, is hard yes, hard no. If someone says, no, I'm voting no, pay attention. If someone says, I need to look at the legislative language, know that from the White House view and the long arc of American legislative political history's view, they're going to come around. And that is distinctly the impression here at the White House. The president said when he started his remarks, I think we have a deal. Wait, I know we have a deal. He feels slightly hesitant as well. The White House knows nothing is done until people start actually putting their votes on the screen in the House and saying them and announcing them on the Senate floor. They are moving in that direction. But no one is going to say, if you're in a negotiating posture and you still think there is some give in the legislative language of this bill, Build Back Better, there isn't any infrastructure bill, that's done and written. But Build Back Better is still being written. If there's something you want and you think there is some chance, no matter how small, of inserting something to make some more progress than currently exists, you're going to stand back. You're going to hold back and talk in very general terms about progress and needing to see things. The distinct impression here at the White House, and the president would not have gone out this morning and spoken as specifically as he did, was that in the end, that text will satisfy all the various Democratic constituencies. And there may be a hiccup or two, but in the next few days, infrastructure will pass and Build Back Better will pass. And this president will be able to say, with some of the smallest legislative majorities in the history of the modern American presidency, he will have passed nearly $5 trillion of domestic spending. 5 times what President Obama passed with much larger House and Senate majorities. And that's the point that the White House will, when all this is done, drive home relentlessly. Not only the things that have changed and the investments made, so-called, but the political ability of this particular White House to achieve so much with the thinnest majorities imaginable in both the House and the Senate.
So, Nicole, you know, what Major is suggesting a little, not to put words in your mouth, Major, is that, you know, there's still some sort of negotiating perhaps around the edges. You know, what are you seeing on Capitol Hill? We listened earlier to Congresswoman Jayapal, and she sounded optimistic, but also, you know, as Major Garrett suggested, did not give a hard yes or a hard no. It was still, we got to keep talking. We got to look at the whole piece of legislation once the T's are crossed and the I's are dotted. So, are you hearing about perhaps still some negotiating around the edges?
Well, I can't imagine there won't be. I mean, look, the bottom line is up until this framework was presented, lawmakers have been all over the map, quite frankly. One day something's in, one day something out. This changes, that changes. We really even haven't seen the full framework until, you know, this plan that got put forth by the White House, which is the product, again, of these negotiations that have happened over the last many months. And so up until this point, lawmakers were negotiating. So I don't know necessarily that this agreement changes that. I think this is an effort more so by the White House to try to circle the wagons and say, look, this is what we can do. This is our best chance. This is our best shot. I need you to be on board with me. That more or less is what the president told Democrats. He said that this is an inflection point and that the world is watching us. He is about to go on the global stage before all of these world leaders, and he would like to have some type of agreement in hand. Speaker Pelosi made a similar point in this meeting with House Democrats earlier today, saying that, we want, when the president gets off the plane, we want him to have a vote of confidence from this Congress. And so if you have these Democrats constantly at odds, you can't portray that unified picture. So in essence, this was a rallying cry to try to get Democrats on board with what they believe is a very realistic package. And the president made clear, I think this is something that can get 50 votes in the Senate, which is essential to ultimately getting his agenda passed. That being said, members are still digesting the details, and progressives in particular have been clear from the start. They want an ironclad agreement here. They don't want things to shift and change and move. They don't want to necessarily vote on this smaller infrastructure bill now, only to have things change with this larger social spending package. So that is a guarantee that they have held pretty firm on. And so that is what we're watching really at this hour, is whether or not there is some movement there, and that progressives might be willing to embrace a vote on this smaller infrastructure package sooner rather than later. Some members emerged from this meeting saying they still have questions about the timing and how all of this will work. So yes, there are quite a number of unresolved issues in the views of lawmakers, whether it's timing, whether it's specific elements of the bill. Members did walk out feeling relatively confident that, look, we're going to get this done, but still I think there's a big question mark as to how and when.
So, Major, one of the things that I found fascinating in the president's remarks is he said, quote, "No one got everything they wanted, including me. But that's what compromise is. That's consensus, and that's what I ran on." And I found that, the reason I found that interesting is, Major, I perhaps, like many others, thought that when President Biden was elected, that he would be an LBJ type of a president, one like LBJ who had spent many years in the United States Senate and who would go and strong-arm members of his party to get his agenda over the finish line. But Biden making the point that, no, I came in as the guy who was going to work behind the scenes, behind closed doors. It wasn't going to be a public, browbeating the way perhaps former President Trump did it, and that I was going to try to get these things done with these types of compromises in place. And so you made the great point, Major, that if he's able to get this over the finish line, that's what people are going to remember in 2022 during the midterms and later on in 2024, specifically as you relate it back to the thin margins that he has here that President Obama did not have.
Right, so let's go through a couple of stages of this, talking about Lyndon Baines Johnson, who came from the Senate Majority Leader position into the vice presidency and ultimately into the White House as President of the United States. And his reputation is strong-arming. Remember, on his biggest achievements, particularly civil rights, he also had to work with civil rights-inclined Senate Republicans. He had recalcitrant segregationist Southern Democrats that he couldn't strong-arm, but he worked in collaboration with Senate moderate and liberal Republicans. So he put together constituencies as needed. President Biden does not have that luxury. This is an intra-party conversation entirely among Democrats because Republicans made clear months ago they were not going to participate in the larger Build Back Better agenda at all. And the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, said, whether you pass it or you don't, we're going to hammer you either way. So this has been a conversation and a pursuit of consensus and collaboration entirely among Democrats, not bipartisan. Infrastructure is bipartisan, and I said before, and it's true, it's a done deal, but only when this other Democratic conversation about Build Back Better is finally and ultimately and textually resolved. And it's that point that we've gotten to now. And Nicole laid out brilliantly all of the variables, but those variables are, in the grand scheme of things, about timing and about process. They are not any longer, at least to my ear, about substance. It appears even those Senate Democrats who don't like component parts of this know this is the best thing that can pass, and that something must pass in order to fulfill the president's promises and to buttress Democratic arguments for the midterm elections. Because one thing Democrats have learned this year, the Biden presidency, is they haven't sold the American Rescue Plan. That was $2 trillion earlier this year very well. And they're going to need to sell this once it passes even better. And the president began to show them how to do that today, talking about, well, what is soft infrastructure? Well, it's home health care. It's a very big deal, as the president said, to the sandwich generation, where you're Republican, Independent, or Democrat. Universal pre-K, climate change. Those things are all real, substantive, and tangible. But if you don't talk about them, if you don't explain them, nobody knows what's happened. And the president began that with a speech today as a template for Democrats if, in fact, this all passes. This is how you talk about it. This is how you describe what we've been working on, lo, these many weeks and months. So the president and the White House are this close to getting all this done and making what he regards and this White House regards as transformative changes that make a difference in the practical lived lives of middle class and lower middle class Americans. And if in fact all this gets through, it will be the largest single investment of that kind, if that's the word you want to use, certainly the White House does, investments since Lyndon Baines Johnson, though achieved through far different and much more difficult legislative realities.
Well, I think, part of the challenge for Democrats talking about what was in the bill is for the longest time, we didn't know what was in it. And still, things are being fine-tuned. I know Nancy Pelosi complained that the media was, spending too much time focusing on the back and forth between Democrats and not talking about what was actually in the legislation. But we couldn't because we didn't know. So now we know. But I wonder now moving forwards, clearly, the president is kind of framing this as, should it pass, a huge win for not just him, but for the American people. But, Republicans are going to pick this up. And I imagine, Nicole, their sort of counter argument is going to be, yeah, but look how much it's going to cost us.
Well, absolutely. I mean, in terms of Republicans and how they're viewing this, I think they're just taking a back seat here and really just watching the dynamics. And they have already, lambasted the administration and Democrats for all of this reckless spending in their view, so much so it almost let us off a fiscal cliff a couple of weeks ago when we had that whole debate over the debt ceiling and, extending or suspending that, which will be a decision Congress will have to face again come later in this year. And Republicans have made clear that they want Democrats to do that by themselves because of all of this spending that they're doing on these social packages. But, to Democrats' defense, what many of them have argued is, as Major just explained very eloquently as well, that, this is transformational change. And as you heard the president say in his remarks, 81 million people voted for this agenda, so we can't deny them that. This is our mandate to deliver on all of the promises that I campaigned on. And so whether you're talking about universal pre-K, whether you're talking about elder care, whether you're talking about, extending these, subsidies and premiums for the Affordable Care Act to help people, pay for medical services and their bills, whether you're talking about the expansion of Medicare, whether you're talking about all of these historic investments in climate. I mean, these have long been priorities of Democrats, and so that is why they do want to get this across the finish line. As I said earlier, it really just is a matter of timing, when, where, and how.
I know we got to wrap this up, but I just want to ask Major really quickly, just one last question, because of something that I was thinking of as we were going through the details of what may or may not be ultimately part of this deal, and the paid leave for parents. It's sort of interesting, Major. President Biden was able to win a significant portion of suburban women in the last election. And you got to wonder if that's going, because 50 Republicans are completely against paid leave, but these two Democrats that seem to be against it, when the majority of Democrats are for it. Specifically, I wonder how that's going to play out with that really specific demographic group as we near closer to the midterms and 2024.
It will be a disappointment for many Democrats, for sure. And it'll be a disappointment for many voters who thought that might be something that President Biden, if he was elected, would be able to achieve. And it was among the very last things at this stage to have fallen out. And I think what the White House would argue is so many other things are still in there that is at least a modest balancing. You can't get everything. We couldn't get it. And what we can only do is put together a framework that we know and have verbal agreement and assurances from those two senators, Kyrsten Sinema of Arizona, Joe Manchin of West Virginia, that they will support this framework. So you can only go so far as the votes will take you. You know what passes in Congress when it's a narrow majority and you need every single vote? What passes is what everyone will vote for and nothing else. That's the simple, basic, fundamental truth of legislative politics. When you have slack in the line and you can give away votes, as President Obama had when he had large House majorities, 257 House Democrats, we should remember, and 60 Senate Democrats when his stimulus bill was passed, you can have more slack in the line. But when you need every single vote, as they do in the Senate, you can only get what every single Democrat will vote for and nothing more. And that's the reality that this White House has always had to face. What has surprised me in this process is that it's taken so long for that reality to sink in across Washington among these Democrats. It was clear to me in January, February, March, when all this was being talked about, hey, look, all this is going to have to go through Kyrsten Sinema and Joe Manchin, so you better have a pretty fundamentally strong idea of where they can go and where they can't go. And all that was more or less discovered in these painstaking, difficult, sort of overly dramatic weeks of internal negotiations. It seems to me that could have been found out much sooner and this could have been moved. But look, things happen when they happen. People compromise when they ultimately compromise. And now it appears we've reached that stage.
Yeah, maybe the White House should have been more on TikTok when I saw those memes of Joe Manchin bouncing around back in January as the most powerful Democrat in the country. They would have known that.
Exactly.
All right.
Exactly.
So on to immigration, police reform, voting, little things like that.
Yes, a long list of stuff.
Major and Nicole, thank you very much.
You guys are awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
So,
All right.
of course, we're going to take a quick break right now, but we've got a lot of news ahead. President Biden is heading off to Europe. He's going to be on his way shortly. You're looking at Air Force One at Joint Base Andrews, waiting for the president. He is heading off to Italy to meet with the G20.